review at contextual factors. We've discussed these already. So when we were talking about, we're moving on from this graph now, and we were talking about delays. So delay is always determined relative to normative development within a given population, is what we were just discussing now. Say if there's a delay now, and we label this child to have a delay in a certain area, we must always remember it's relative. Therefore, cutoff points or cutoff scores that define delay in one population cannot be assumed to define delay in another population. So now, when we're talking about delay and factors that influence the delays, we're looking at poverty as one of critical factors. Young children growing up in poverty are more likely to experience developmental delays. This is generalized, and growth deficits than those that come from more privileged backgrounds, because they are disproportionately exposed to a wide range of co-occurring risk factors that impact on development. So when we talk about poverty, I don't know, what's the definition of poverty right now? When they say, I know that area Mkanyagute is regarded as one of the most areas affected by poverty. They say there are levels of poverty. And I think in general, it depends on the socioeconomic factors of the area, and they look at number of households versus, what's the formulation? I forgot to look it up. But there's a method of calculating it. I know Goduguti in KZN, Onkanyaguti is regarded as an area that is most stricken by poverty. So according to this, then those children are at high risk of developmental delays. But generally, what are we talking about when we're talking about children living in poverty? You know, I thought I understood that. I thought I understood poverty until I worked in Gwelezana Hospital, and we had to do a clinic visit. We went to an area just outside Empangeni, Oktua, Ugwa. But it's not so far, it's hardly 50 km from Gwelezana. And I thought, because it's still here, the living conditions are the same as what I know. And then we visited some households there. And I walked into this house. It was, from the outside, it looks like a 2-room house. And as I walk in, I'm expecting the usual, kitchen cabinets, chairs, and a bed maybe on the second room. And I found nothing. There was nothing. There was just maybe a wooden stool on that corner. The floor was muddy, and there were no kitchen appliances, no fridge, no stove. They were cooking from the ground or outside, just outside this house. And over there, I looked over, I was expecting a bed, and I was shocked. I was in utter shock to say, how are these people living? So and when you ask how many people live in this house, about 6 people, and they all live in those 2 rooms, and I cannot see where they sleep. So it really opened my eyes to say, when you talk about people living in poverty, we have another assumption in our mind to say, if you're living in poverty, probably you didn't have bread for breakfast, but you had putu. And maybe you don't have a fancy Samsung fridge, but you do have a fridge. Yeah. So when we and people come out of those households where you don't see anything missing from them, because people, our black mentality, we focus on how we look. So when you see these people in town, you can see they're not rich, but you don't see that they're coming from that house. And for this particular household, I wondered, what do they eat? It's like when you look around, because they didn't have cupboards, I could see their food. So you see, it's just a sack of mealie meal, and a couple of vegetables. So I wondered, what actually do they eat? Because I don't see food. Because I'm thinking, if I open my cupboard and I'm looking for food, and my children always say, "Ma, there's no food." They're always complaining there's no food in the house. And I open the cupboard, I see food. But if you go to those households and you look and see in their cupboard what you expect to see in a house, at least a can of oil or a bottle of oil, some rice, some sugar. In some households you don't see that. So I don't know what your perspective of poverty was. What do you think? Yeah.
Okay, so how does that affect the brain in the development? Like not having a fridge or a bed?
Okay.
Because I don't think that we can just say because then I think we need to redefine maybe what growth deficit is or delays, because in rural areas kids start working at 9 months, 10 months, they start talking, so they don't have a delay. Maybe we can say due to less exposure to other things, maybe they tend to, when they're growing up, even in high school, they don't aim higher. They don't, because they don't know another work, because they don't have access. So we can say maybe they have limited, what's that word? But it's not really that it's growth deficits. I also grew up where we didn't have a fridge, we didn't have a bed, so I don't know, I disagree.
I don't think the issue is about the fridge.
Yes.
I think where she was getting to is to say poverty.
Yes,
So how do you define poverty?
How do you define poverty?
But I don't think poverty.
That's where I'm getting to. I want to help you understand.
Okay.
So
I
that
think
statement
it's
says
access
young children growing in poverty, and it's a true fact. Delays, development is to experience developmental delays and growth deficits. You must take it in context, because if you had something that is called premature aging.
Yes.
What does that mean?
As in you age prematurely.
Yeah. So development, when you say they start working at 9, sometimes from my own perspective, it may not be the right thing to do. Because literally, you see, they may be running, but they are not healthy.
Yeah.
They are actually forced by circumstances to do that. So we are talking of an ideal situation. That range is of an ideal situation. So a child can, I know children who are, if I go to my rural home, so children who are 5, 6, they are carrying a big bucket of water coming from the stream. My daughter, who is 10, 11, 12, is like, how can that be? So we talk of the ideal.
Yeah.
So if you say kids, in fact, I kept on listening to you saying they start at 9, and I'm saying, are they starting properly?
Yeah.
But she's the expert.
That is going back then to the Eurocentric idea of when, I thought earlier we said we should look at what works for another community, what's true for another community is not true for us. So if you're saying 9 months, it's like you're going back to saying,
I'm looking at the holistic picture, the total of that child, to look at, are they well nourished?
Yeah.
That's one thing you must understand. Things happen, and I was serious when I said, if you are not well fed between the age 0 and 5, don't expect wonders. Our kids are now this tall. I look at my son like this. It's not a question of he has got different genes. It's just that he got the right care at the right time, which I didn't get myself. So again, when we should not, say, condemn everything that is Eurocentric.
No, I'm
I
not
think we should be
condemning.
having
I'm saying it needs to be defined. Growing up in poverty does not delay. Maybe when you don't reach your full potential or whatnot because you had limited, you do not have the same exposure as someone who grew up in a different area.
Did you see that one?
So it's not...
So listen, let's be academic. Did you see those references?
Yeah.
Where you read them?
Where is Dlamini?
No,
That's why.
Okay.
Where did
So
those
it's,
references?
but I grew up in rural communities.
I mean, if you look at even poverty, right? Poverty is not a bad thing because it's not. We don't say poverty is bad simply because there is nothing that you are going to measure and find positive in it. But the gross measurement of poverty puts everything on the negative. So what it means is
it's access
even where
and exposure. That's
so
what you're saying.
Listen.
So even when it comes to some development issues, there are some development issues which in a community that is poor will appear positive, but those may be one or two. But when you look at it in the totality, the general development of the child is delayed. But if we're to pick out just one thing and say it's positive, and then try to assume that everything else is now positive, then we'll get the wrong picture. Right.
So I can tell you a child-headed family. That's another indication of poverty there. So when you have a child-headed family, you are giving responsibilities to a 10-year-old child that she should not be having. And you cannot, it may be positive in that she is independent, she can do things, but the total picture of it is that that development of that being has been totally distorted. And they will never reach their full potential. But what I want you to do is, in addition to those, I think I sent you, isn't it, when I was in London, a whole list of literature on ECD. Tony, please read it. And then you supplement. We don't want your personal experience.
Saying that needs to be redefined. I was saying it needs to be redefined.
Okay, I like your attitude. I like your.
But she's not reading.
You know what? There are two issues there.
It needs to be redefined.
Yeah, there are two issues that we are combining. Poverty is one risk factor. We talk about risk factors for development. So living in poverty increases risk for developmental delays. But exposure is another element, it's different. Limited exposure to certain things and opportunities is also an, and it can affect children whether they're in rural or not rural, or whether they live in poverty or not, because children are exposed to different things at different ages. So those are two separate
contextual example that she knows of.
Okay.
So our community research assistants, they've all done matric, isn't it? Yeah. But I can tell you, and it's not about trying to tell lies. So I won't use my own child. In case you say you're using your own child, I will say your own child, who is 10 years older, if you've got a 10-year-old. If you compare with those community research assistants in certain things, your child is better.
Yeah.
Just the comprehension, understanding what is happening in their country, speaking fluently, you will. Why is it like that? It's because it's nothing wrong with those kids in Mukanyakudi. It's the environment they grew up in the education system we talked about earlier on.
Yes.
So that's access and exposure.
That's what?
Access and exposure. They did not have good
Very good.
access
Now we are
to
coming
good
home.
education.
Those
So
access and exposure
it's
is
not
part of
delayed.
poverty.
The lack of access is also part of
part
poverty.
of poverty.
The lack of access is due to poverty.
Yeah.
And it's just that I think Dr. missed a whole discussion at the beginning of what are cognitive skills. And if you go back to that, but we'll catch up with that later as well, because I'm repeating some of the things. So when we look at cognitive development, we're not just looking at physical well-being, but we're looking at memory, we're looking at processing skills, we're looking at language, we're looking at processes of higher cognitive function, which we'll explain later. So those really depend on a number of things. Some of it, like we discussed, diet. Let me see if I can get back to that. I don't think so, because it was part of our discussion. some of it is due to diet and even the level of education of parents, and how the level of education of parents determines how parents actually interact with the child. And the style of interaction with the child determines what the child learns and how they learn it and how fast they learn it. So a level of poverty is, like I said, has a number of levels, and it affects different aspects of the child's brain development. So yeah, it's not just access is something else and opportunities, but the actual level of poverty affects brain development, the lack of resources in there. So when I was referring to the fridge, I'm talking about if you don't have a fridge, they probably don't have fresh fruits and vegetables. You probably don't have even apples in your household.
System with the parents as well.
Yes. If the parents are unemployed, they probably cannot afford to buy grapes. That's a luxury. They don't have milk, fresh milk in their house. So that affects the child's diet, that affects their brain development. If they don't have a TV, it's not just about exposure to something, but it means they not afford an opportunity to learn certain things that a child who has a TV would know. Yeah, well, so that level of exposure to outside environment and opportunities is afforded by, it's directly related to a level of poverty. You are right that some children will grow up fine and be fine in their environment when we compare them, because we're looking at these children in this environment and we're testing them compared to their peers, and we're not going to test them compared to children in Durban. But if we were to compare them to children in Durban, then we would see vast differences in scores. And perhaps qualitatively we will not see that much of a difficulty, and we might even find strengths. There would be areas of strengths, because they might learn things and be exposed to things that children don't have to. So they become stronger in fine motor skills, gross motor skills, but do they have the same level of processing speed when it comes to memory? We will find out. So those are the things we need to consider. At this point, it's all about just being aware of these things, and we cannot go into a test environment with an assumption of routine. So this is what we expect here. But we have to have awareness. Things might be different because of this. That's the purpose of this discussion, to say things might be different. Our scores might be affected by these things. We're not saying the scores will be affected positively or negatively, but it's true that these factors will affect our scores one way or another. So we discussed cultural factors earlier, to say culture is a wide range of values for the skills and abilities that children should develop and where they should be exhibited. That's what culture is about. We said culture is the way of doing things, the lifestyle, the way the family even decides to do things, the way of doing things in the family versus community. If the child is at school, their way of doing things at the school. So those things determine when certain abilities should be exhibited. So, and they reflect the norms for that cultural population and the normative basis. So these are not norms in a Western sense. We're talking norms loosely. We're using the word norms loosely. It's basically what is the level, what is our age, expected age of doing whatever. So expected age of development for this particular population. So abilities may emerge earlier if they are valued and encouraged in a particular culture. However, this does not mean that the other abilities won't ever develop. Maybe they just develop later. So these culturally specific patterns must be considered in assessing the validity of a measurement, and our particular concern when comparisons are made across population ethnic groups. Like I said, I think in this study we will not compare across, but one day perhaps it will be relevant to do that, you know? To say, okay, so the results we obtained at Josini, if we compare it to the results we obtained in Zimbabwe, how are they different? There are two different communities, two different languages, but when you look at the skills, how do they compare? So we're doing a study, but not in isolation. It can always be compared to another population. Hence, we have to be aware with, okay, so we can compare these elements, but we can't compare that. Now, because of these differences, it might have an effect on these cognitive skills. So we also talked about environmental factors. See here, I separated, I said environmental factors. Initially, I said contextual factors. One might think it's not the same thing. But here again, persistent poverty, many risks are present throughout the child's life. And other risk factors may emerge and accumulate over time. You see the risks, sometimes a child is born and there are risk factors that are identified when a child is born. But those risk factors, the example you gave, Mhleni, was a good one with your friend's baby. So when the child was born, they identified this is a high-risk baby. But if we do 1, 2, 3, 4, by age 3, this level of risk has gone down. So for some children, they're not born in a high-risk environment, but by being moved from this environment to that, now suddenly the risks are emerging. And sometimes if the family's conditions change, the level of risk change again. Perhaps the mother gets employed, so now we see the graph is reducing on the level of risks there, because suddenly the child is able to get yogurt to take to school. And before there was no yogurt. So that little element adds a whole lot of difference in the child's performance. Child's level of confidence. Remember, cognitive development also has to do with emotional well-being. So when the child is more confident, their performance is likely to improve. Just by adding something that will improve their level of confidence and happiness. So when we look at high risk factors, the note I was making there is about which AMA risk factors keep changing depending on the context or the environment of the child. But if a child is in persistent poverty, then again the risk factors, I don't know if they stay the same, it really depends on each case. The addition of this kind of risk to existing factors, these factors are just what we were talking about now. Low parent IQ, educational level of parents, high family density, low birth weight for children, parental mental health, if they are stressed or depressed, all those things. Or understimulation at the home environment. If a child is not afforded a chance to go to a preschool, for instance, and they do not have a TV at home, so they are understimulated compared to a child who has those things. And this now contributes to higher cumulative risks level in children. And this is very important for children 0 to 3 years. And sometimes